Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. You know what's really important to me when I do business with a company is trust and transparency. I've been telling you now for a good while about my buddy Damon Burton and his company, SEO National, because trust and transparency are just as important to them. You know, for the last 15 years, in the search engine optimization space, they have been leading the way and serving people tremendously well. Now, for those of you that don't know what SEO is, it stands for search engine optimization. It helps you show up higher on Google searches so that folks that are looking for what you have find you quicker. And you know what's really encouraging? More revenue, more sales, growing your business. Do me a favor. Get in touch with Damon and his team today at SEO National at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get your free quote and tell them you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. I hope you're ready, because here comes a dynamite conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. I have a great guest here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. I have a podcast host, and I love it when I can have a podcast host on, because again, they get the medium, they understand it. And if you're watching on YouTube, Shay's got it. He's got a rocking background. He's got the mic. He's got the headphones. And so, yeah, you know, when podcast hosts show up, they know how to show up. Not that other guests don't show up correctly, but just something different about a podcast host themselves. And it raises my game. And so, again, I have got the co-host of the Pantry podcast, Faith Works Community. And by the way, you can get that podcast wherever you get podcasts. We're going to talk about that and so much more with Shay Watson, who joins me on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Shay, what's good? How you doing?
Hey, Brian, man, it's awesome to be here. It's always exciting to sit down with fellow podcasters and just tear it up and talk about how good God is.
Yeah. Well, every time I hear the last name Watson, it takes me back to a movie called Coming to America. And I see this guy, I see the guy on there. He goes, "Put your hands together for Mr. Randy Watson."
Boy, that takes us back a little bit, doesn't it?
Well, and that's what my son and I use. Yeah. Well, dude, that's what my son and I use when something is good and terrible. We call that a Randy Watson, because there's the following scene where the three guys are sitting there and the one guy goes, "That boy good," and Eddie Murphy's character goes, "Mm-hmm, good and terrible."
Well, I'm Shay Watson. That's the Shea butter, and hopefully I'm smoother.
Well, yeah, you're not good and terrible.
I don't know. Actually, I usually tell people, they go, "How do you spell your name?" I'm like, Shea butter. And I'm like, but I'm not that smooth.
Yeah. Growing up a baseball fan, growing up a Reds fan, the first thing when I think of Shea is Shea Stadium, the old stadium that the New York Mets played in for a long time. So that's what I think of. So
spelling came from that, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. No, but no story like my family was like fans or anything like that. But the spelling was originated out of that stadium.
Dude, that's awesome. Hey, let's start here.
Okay.
With our podcast, with podcasts and things like that. I normally would go in this direction. We'll get deeper into your podcast and your story here in a little bit, but take me through the last almost 2 years as you've been podcasting through a pandemic, like I have been podcasting, because I tend to ask my guests when I'm leading off a podcast, you know, what lesson have you learned in the last almost 2 years as we've kind of walked through this pandemic? I want to start with this question with you, Shay. How have you podcasted differently in the last couple of years through this pandemic?
I think when it comes to podcasting and being within that community of podcasters, what you start to learn really fast is that we might come from different churches or different backgrounds or different, sometimes, you know, the minor beliefs, you know, but you really start to encompass this solid of the major beliefs that, Jesus Christ is Lord, and he died on a cross. And what we've really found encouraging over this last year being in the podcast realm is being able to connect with people. It's amazing to hear other people's stories. It's amazing, like hearing your story or going out to some of the groups and just really digging in and meeting people. Not that we've shut down. Hey, look, our church has been rolling since this whole pandemic started. But what's really cool is we get to even be more engaged. I think that's a cool word, engaged. And over the last 2 years, I would say that what's happened in my life during this and what's happening because of podcasting or because of ministry or because of the places where I've ended up, or with COVID, almost on my deathbed in COVID, God has been sifting me to the idea that this army warrior, we'll get deeper in that, but this army warrior really has no control of what's going on in the world, and that I need to take a step back and really let God do his work and put everything into that realm, into that prayerful realm.
Well, and here's the thing too. And what I'll say about this podcast is that it doesn't matter to me if a Christian is listening to it, although I'm a Christian. It doesn't matter to me if a Christian's listening to it or someone that doesn't have a faith walk, that doesn't, they would call themselves non-Christian, maybe agnostic. It doesn't matter to me because encouragement is universal. And I loved what you said about sifting, because I think no matter what walk of life that you're in, Shay, we've all gone through struggles that have kind of sifted us and kind of made us stop and realize, okay, the things. And I love what you said with sifting, because really what you're trying to do in the sifting process is get rid of those impurities, get rid of those things that aren't supposed to be there, which all of us have done. Companies have done that. Companies have said, here's a good example. Restaurants that never did takeout previously, we're now sifting through their revenues going, we've got to do something else, or sifting through their business model and going, man, we've got to do something else or we're going to die. And so that sifting brings the good things brings those good things to the top. And maybe in a business or church setting, it brought some of those good things to the top. When you think about the sifting process for you, what was that aha moment? Maybe that V8 moment where you said, this is the lesson that I'm really getting out of this.
So September, I came down with COVID. I guess Delta variant. I'm so lost on what variants are where and who's getting what. But on day 12, my wife actually looked down, thought I was done. Never ended up in the hospital because my oxygen levels always stayed above 90, but my lungs would just seize. And in that moment of just laying there, like I said, I'm one of those guys that like to mix it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. You get that, how many years in the military, 30 plus years in the military. And like, you're used to war, you're used to battle, you're used to being the one who puts on the armor and all these things. And I'm laying in that bed and I've got a verse on the board because I was in the second bedroom and we got our prayer board in there. And it was Nahum 1:7. It's like, the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who trust in him. And I'm laying there listening to the Bible app 24/7. I'm laying on this bed. I can do nothing. The most I can do is with 103.8 temperature is take myself, I'm trained medic as well, but take myself to the bathtub, put myself in the bathtub, bring my temperature down a little bit. I can barely get there, but I'm doing all of this. I'm checking my pulse ox, checking my temperature. I'm trying to keep it down the best I can. Doctors are telling me, hey, look, when you get work bad enough, show up at the emergency room. And no medications were coming. Wife got online, got some medications to me, but I'm laying there and God's like, I've got this. Mm-hmm. I've got this. And what does that do? It's like what you were saying. It's like, being able to talk with everyone, being able to put yourself aside, humble yourself before the Lord, humble yourself, into a servant's position, and really start to not necessarily, you don't agree all the time, but it's like, let me listen. Yeah. Let me hear what these other narratives are instead of trying to hold my own narrative.
Shay, I gotta jump in here because I think where I'm fascinated with this, and forgive me for kind of stepping away from the spiritual. I don't want to diminish the spiritual, but here's where my thought is going as you're talking about this. You know what's going on in your body from your training and everything that you know in your career in the military as a medic. You know what's going on in your body. You probably know what the doctor's prescribing. You're probably going, yeah, that'd be the same thing I would probably do if I were in a military hospital, or if I were on, if I were in the war field, I would be, I would probably try to, if I had a soldier that came in with 103.8 degree fever, here's how I would start to treat him or her, things like that. Knowing what you knew, how did you keep your mind from going to the worst case scenario? Because I would think that for me, if I'm laying there and I have a high fever and I have a hard time breathing, yeah, I feel terrible, but I don't have the knowledge you have. I don't know what you know. Knowing what you know, how did you keep your mind in a place of overcoming what you were going through?
I think it's just something that's built up over time. You're in the battlefield, you're in the wars. You're, I was hospitalized at one point, combat related injuries and PTSD. And you just come to this conclusion, and I've come to this conclusion a long time ago, but now, of course, you say, not to take it away from the spiritual, but also there's a lot of spiritual to that. There's an acceptance of where I'm going. Before Jesus came along, it was like, honestly, I thought I was going to another place. I had my bed made. I was gonna be in the pits of hell. Is really
going from no to oh boy. Yeah,
oh boy. Yeah. I'm gonna be suffering the rest of my life.
Well, yeah, because most people. Well, Shay, most people in that situation realize that when life is coming to an end, if they, let's say they have a terminal illness or something like that, it's kind of like regret. Where am I going? And that's why I say, oh no to oh boy, because the Apostle Paul says to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Right. And the Apostle Paul was like, oh, okay, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And so the Apostle Paul knew, maybe in his former life as he walked the Damascus Road, as he was holding the coats of people that were stoning Stephen, and he was involved in that, he was probably like, oh no. But now he's gone to, oh boy, because he knew where he was going.
Right.
He knew where life was taking you. So that's why I said it that way. And I love what you said about keeping your mind in the right places, in heavenly places. Not that you're trying to say, hey, man, I'm so ready to check out of here. Because we're humans, man, right? Because we have families. We love people. I don't want to die. I don't want to go. But knowing that, okay, the ultimate reward for a Christian is that I'm going to get to see Jesus, or reconnect with, my case, reconnect with my dad. Right. Reconnect with uncles and aunts and grandparents who've gone on to be with the Lord. Take me to the moment when you started to get recovery. How did your mindset shift when you started to feel better and you're going, okay, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to be okay with this. Because maybe there's somebody that is walking that road right now, or has walked that road, and they're still not quite there yet in their mind and in their heart, because there's still some fear there. How did you overcome that when you knew you were getting better and moving forward?
There's a purpose. I think purpose is incredible. I think that so the Apostle Paul said, I'd rather be in heaven, but I have work to do here.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's like, okay, look, that's not where I went. That's not where I went. I have work to do here. What is that work? So you kind of start adjusting how you're thinking. Okay, so I'm not going to die, because I'm laying on the bed. Hey, look, honestly, I thought I was going to die too. I'm like, I'm not going to make it. My lungs would seize. I would try. The only way to breathe, and I know this is going into that realm again, but it's like I would try to say Jesus's name. My lungs would not work. I would be sitting there trying to just get them to work, and it would just be like, Jesus, to the ability to breathe. See, so the healing process. So here I was breathing. Here I was starting to recover. Here I was being able to start forming words. Here I was looking up at my wife that I love. My little 2-year-old baby who comes in and was praying for me here and there. Her mom would ask her, hey, look, go pray for your Baba. And my little girl would be like, no. And my wife was like, why won't she just go pray? She does this. Yeah. But in secret, she would sneak in and put her hands on me, a little 2-year-old, and say, Baba, Lord, heal. Baba, Lord, heal. And you come out of it and you're looking at life and you're like, okay, this is abundant. This is abundant living now. This is what God says. He says, I will carry you through. He made the storm be still and the waves of the sea were hushed. Mm-hmm. My storm that I was going through was hushed. My storm that I was going through became still. And at the end of it, you just look up to the heavens and you're like, wow, okay, what do I do now? What can I do now?
Yeah.
Show me a way.
Well, yeah. And I love that part of it because, again, when we are in really tough situations, the mind races because you're almost in fight or flight. And you know this from your military background. The fight or flight mechanism really kicks in because at that point, to what you were talking about, you were just struggling to breathe because your lungs were seizing. And that fight or flight kicks in and you don't know what to do but to just go, I don't know what else to do. But just for Christian, we don't know what else to do but to call on the Lord.
Right.
That's all you know how to do in that moment. And I've told people this before. It's like, I can't help you. The only thing I can do is pray for you. Mm. And sometimes that's a throwaway line, but it's really powerful because what you're really saying is, I'm going to do the best thing that I know to do for you in that moment. And that's to pray and really seek the Lord. Let's step aside, take a break. We come back. I want to dive more into your podcast, the Pantry Podcast with your wife, Michelle. Beautiful podcast. I'm looking at the website here, thepantrypodcast.com. Some powerful guests. And so I want to talk about the power of your podcast and what we're doing here with spreading intentional encouragement. My guest, the co-host of the Pantry Podcast, Shay Watson, joining me on the Intentional Encourager Podcast. Shay is also a military veteran, and we'll get into that story here in a minute as well, too. But we're going to step aside, take a break. Come back with us here on the Intentional Encourager Podcast. Back in a moment. Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. The new year is upon us, and you may be sitting there thinking, hey, I would really love to pay off some debt, or I would like to save for that dream vacation. Maybe you want to buy a new car. Whatever it is you want to do financially in the coming year, let me give you a great piece of intentional encouragement and something to think about that might help you do it. Products for Profit. Now, this is a course taught by my good friend Joe Hart, who's been a guest on the Intentional Encourager Podcast and has told his story how reselling changed his life. And you know what, folks? It could do the same thing for you, too. It's really simple. Reselling is basically buying a product and then reselling it online for more money. And Joe is going to take you through the steps and show you how to do this either part-time or maybe, as some of his students have done, take this full-time as well. Go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP. And oh, by the way, this group is going to help you find leads of products that are profitable right now, give you all kinds of great intentional encouragement, and you're going to be surrounded by a community of people that are going to want to see you be successful in the reselling game. Again, go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/ premium PFP and tell him you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Shay, let's dive into the podcast because I'm looking at the guest. I mean, you've got some great guests, and people have said to me, "Is like, Brian, you've had some good guests on your podcast," and I'm looking at yours and I'm going, "Man, this is powerful." Take me to the moment that you and your wife decided to do the type of podcast that you're doing, because it's different, it's unique, it's unusual. Where was that born out of, and how did that ultimately translate in doing a podcast like you've done?
Pantry Podcast was born out of conversations that my wife and I would have on the couch. So she came to Christ in 2014, December. She started going to the church that we go to now. January, I show up. Through different means and different avenues. We start going to Bible study together. We start learning one another. We start having conversations about the Word of God. We start sitting on the couch and just talking about this. I'm going through Bible college. I'm doing all kinds of things and just getting closer to the Lord, because I think that sometimes when you hit rock bottom, you hit the rock of salvation, and then from there you learn, wow, I can't go any lower than I was. And he's just going to keep carrying me. And so conversation, my wife and I, we just love to have conversations. And so one day she comes in the kitchen, and I think this was January of 2020 actually. And she's like, we should start a podcast. And I'm sitting in the kitchen. I mean, look, I'm men's ministry leader. I'm like life group ministry leader. I work with the pastor beside the pastor in the church. I mean, I'm working in Kenyan missions. I'm doing all kinds of things. And she's like, I know it's a lot, but just pray about it. And so we're sitting there, we're talking about it, and I love the kitchen. The Pantry Podcast, we hardly say an analogy about food. It's the funniest thing. But I'm sitting in the kitchen and I cook. I love to cook. And so we would talk while I'm cooking, or we'd sit on the couch and talk while we're cooking. So she's like, we should just take this on air and start just talking about the Bible, talking about the encouragement, maybe challenge a little bit to ourselves, especially to look in the mirror and say, hey, how can I be a brighter light? How can I bring truth to the Word of God and really show God for who he is? And so I'm sitting in the kitchen as I'm cooking, and she's like, I wonder what we should call it. And I'm like, the Pantry Podcast. And then, of course, the analogies start to fly. It's like, ooh, what's in your pantry? What's in your heart? Is it spiritual nutrition, or is it junk food? And so that is how the Pantry Podcast originated. And then from there, it's just been a prayerful, nonstop. We do seasons. We put in our little Rolodex the guests that come into play with our different seasons, and we just really keep it in the Word, and we just love the conversation. I love sitting next to her. Usually you can see double of us on the screen, and, on our YouTube channel. We went live this year, so you can really see it more. And she sits next to me, and I just love looking over at her and just talking about, the Word of God and how good he's been, in our lives and the people that we have on the show. And it's just amazing. We just love people who have a story. We're kind of like your podcast. It's like, we just love those stories where people are like, man, I overcame. My identity is no longer in the world, but it's in Christ. It's no longer I, but Christ who lives in me. And because I had an identity crisis, I had, I hated me. It's amazing that you when you hate yourself so much, when you see that little glimpse of God's love, and he really starts to break through that shell of the hate, and you start to see that love, how it starts to manifest, and let's use a better word for people who might not understand that. It starts to grow, and you really start to see this glow and this beauty and this unchanging love of a father. And so we just decided, hey, let's put this on air. Let's just talk like we talk and just have conversations.
People would be surprised of what's in my pantry. There's like peanut butter and bacon, there's like pre-cooked bacon, some tuna, some ramen noodles. Because my wife uses our pantry like, okay, if we were stuck and we needed to eat to sustain, or power outage, stuff like that. Of course, we live in West Virginia, so what do you expect? I mean, it's like we probably should have junk food there, living in the fattest state in the country, but we don't. We have my wife's philosophy that was, and here's where I'm going with this. My wife's philosophy about Stocking Our Pantry was, she wanted things in there that we didn't need to cook. We didn't need to to do a lot of prep to it. If we had to have it, we could just open it up and eat it. And I love what you said there about that, because some people's pantries are perfectly stocked. They're just like, well, I'm going to have spices in the pantry. I'm going to have, this in the pantry and things like that. Stuff they might use day to day. But when the rubber meets the road, how is that going to serve them? How's that going to help them? And then some people like ourselves, and I'm not saying we're perfect and we do it right, but my wife was very intentional about the pantry. When you think about the people that you've had on your podcast, what did they bring to your pantry? What did they add to your pantry that made you stop and go, wow, from having this conversation with that person, now this is in my spiritual pantry, so to speak. Take me through that. What have you found that's added to your kind of spiritual pantry?
Sustenance, capacity, understanding. We've had some really, really cool guests that have really challenged the way that we love. Maybe lifestyles that were different than ours, different perspectives to different topics, and just having an ear to hear how a transformation is being done, sometimes not in the perfect way that you would like. You're like, oh, you get God and you should be able to see all these wonderful fruit. And it's like, well, you're seeing fruits. You're seeing change.
Or you get God and your life is just suddenly supposed to be perfect.
Right. And it's not like, okay, our pantry, I got two pantries. I got one like you have, and then I've got the disorganized one I work out all the time. So it's got like all the spices and all the oils and and then I've got the
ours has got toilet paper and paper towels in it, man. Because
I got a closet for that.
Yeah, that's what my wife did. She turned a closet in our house into kind of like a makeshift pantry, because I'm like, all of a sudden I'm unloading stuff and I'm like, where does this go? It's like, in there.
Right.
That's a closet in a spare bedroom. No, it's pantry. No, right. That's pantry now. And so when I need to go run and get, dude, listen, that's where we keep water enhancers. We keep mints. We keep sweetener. I like stevia. So I'm telling you, there is just so much. But you know what? I love where you're going with that, because every guest, whether it's this podcast or the Pantry podcast, leaves a little something in that pantry that just adds to it. And then I find myself, and Shay, I don't know if it's like this for you, but I find myself thinking back to episodes that I've recorded, and something that was said, I'm like, I remember that. Like, that's something that somebody left. And we're, as we record this, we've officially released 188 episodes. Unofficially, with some bonus episodes, we're well over 200 episodes. And you sit there and you go, how much different would my life be if this medium hadn't come about? Where is the next for the pantry? What do you see you got? Let me stop myself here. Let me ask you this way. Give me one or two people that you really would love to sit down and have a conversation with on your podcast if you could.
Oh boy. That changes all the time.
Doesn't it though? Yeah, I mean, it really does.
There for a while is Vody Bokum, and then I'm like, well, okay. It's like maybe not. But I don't think that I always look for the name, the one that just stands out. We've been blessed. Some of the bigger names reached out to us, and so it was a blessing to have them on. But really, if I was to sit here and say my next guest, right, would really just be that next impactful story or that impactful idea. how can we further this love of God? How can we further disciple people in the ways that are a beautiful way of doing it, instead of just this forceful way that I always hear about? I honestly, I never hit the church hurt scene.
Yeah.
I was so far away from the church that I never really hit that scene. When I was a kid, yes, I grew up in Assemblies of God. Yes, I at the time believed that if I sin, I go to hell. But sometimes I don't know if that was because of the church or because of how I misunderstood his grace and his mercy and his love. And so, but when I look at the perfect guest for our show, it would be that story of somebody who just came from the bottom, or somebody who has knowledge to speak to that person who came from the bottom. But what we generally tend to have are the people who have been in the bottom, who have really had lives that God radically changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, you take in J. Warner Wallace, I'll shout out a name there, but you take J. Warner Wallace, and that dude turns around on our interview and starts interviewing us about how we're raising our child and asking us questions.
Yeah.
Because it's important, how we raise our children up. And it's just amazing the meat and the content that has come out of these. So do I have a guest that is on my top 10 list? Yeah. The guest who is going to be able to shine the kingdom.
Yeah. Well, and I tell people too, and this may happen to you, and I'll peel back the curtain a little bit, and then we'll step aside and take a break. But for those of you listening to this podcast, what happens sometimes is that people will reach out to you because they're just looking to be on podcasts. They're trying to get on as many podcasts as they can get, whether they have a book, their own podcast, whatever it is. They're just looking to get on as many podcasts as they can. And I'm real intentional, Shay, and I'd love to get your perspective on this. For this podcast, I want to know your story. Like, I'm a happy, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate that. But what is it about your story that is going to make people go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. And I think a lot of times people are looking to just go, I just want to be out there instead of saying, let me tell you my story. Whether it's a salvation story, whether it's just a life story about abuse or overcoming a sickness or losing a loved one and how it impacted them, overcoming depression, something like that, to where it's like, that's the, because here's the thing, we and forgive me for going here for just a minute, but it's almost like we get so focused on the garnish on the plate that we forget there's a steak there. Or the chef that's more interested in how the plate looks than how it tastes, than what's actually in it, the meat of that. And that's what I would encourage some people. And I don't know how you feel. Well, when I say something like that, as a podcast host yourself, what does that trigger inside of you, or kind of spark inside of you that way, about how people approach you guys to come on the Pantry podcast?
So interestingly enough, we don't get a lot of people approaching us. I think that sometimes in the podcast community, they look at us as strong personalities, in the sense of what our show is a makeup of.
Yeah.
We speak straight. We speak very literal to the Bible. We're very close to the Bible. And again, when I look at the camera, I'm telling you, I'm looking at this camera now. I have the little thing flipped. I can see it on the screen over there as well, but I have the camera, screen flipped, and I'm looking at myself. So what is that like? I rarely reach out for interview. I am very prayerful about everything that I do. I read through the CPA. I read through, these different platforms of podcasters and people looking for guests. And I would hope that that would be the heart behind people who want to be on a show. You know, God used me, and God, where do you want to use me?
Yeah.
So we're very intentional. I love the word behind you, intentional.
Yeah.
Because we just came off of our life group year, and we do a word of a year. You know, that's kind of our baseline. This year's obedience. Last year was intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be intentional. If you're coming on the show, I want to hear your story. I don't want the promotion of a book is awesome. If you got a book coming out, but we're going to be prayerful about it. So when people they do reach out, and we look at it, and we pray about it, and we go in and we dig in, and we see. But we're very intentional about our show. Even, not to throw it out there, but you even asked, and it's like, well, I'll sit down with you, and let's see where you fit in. Where would you come into a season? Because I want God to be in control of the season. And I think I want God to be in control of what show I go on, or what show my wife interviews on, because we're not going for the 1,000 or even the 10,000. We really went into this for the one.
Yeah,
if one person could, and when you look at my story, and it's like broken home, molestation, identity crisis, all the way through military, combat, PTSD, lost, miscarriages and birth, like my ex-wives, addiction. You start looking at all of these things that have built my life in the world to when I turned 41, and it just changed everything. And you look back and you're like, you know what? I touch a lot of avenues.
Yeah.
I don't like to talk to all those avenues every time. I think I sat down once with Rodney on I can't. I'll come up with it. But on his podcast, Breaking Daylight, or one of those, and it's like I had to go through my whole story, and it was a long episode, and it was like, but I can touch on these things. And really, when you boil it down, I had an addiction problem. I had addiction to women, addiction to drugs, addiction to needing to be encouraged, or needing to be told I was doing good. And at the end of the day, 41 years into my life, I realized I don't need that. I just need one thing. And so my identity crisis became healed, because it was no longer I or the world identifying me, but it was Christ who was identifying me for who I was. And I think that's important to get out there to people. You said broken people, or people who are suffering, or people going through depression. We always go towards the world. And I'm not saying there aren't good things out there, but is good God? Can good fix what God can fix?
Yeah.
I would, in my opinion, I say no. I think we can Band-Aid things. I was bandaged for a long time. And every time something went wrong, we peel that Band-Aid off. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about podcasting, I think it's really important that we're intentional. The guests that we pick, we really think about, we pray about, we bring them in, because, it's not just, their story's cool and it's going to get me listens. No, their story is cool and it's going to help somebody.
Yeah, that's it. That's it right there. That's it. Because Shay, you and I love where this conversation's going, and I want to tell a part of your story, but that's what it's about. It's about what happens when someone is listening and they hear the story and they go, I've walked that road. Because there's immediately there and I said this in my book, and I'll refer back to it, and it's the one line in my book that I always say: people buy connection before they ever make a transaction. And when people feel connected to something, they turn the radio up, right? They could be listening to the radio, they could be listening to a sports talk show, they could be listening to a podcast, but when something connects with them, the first thing they're doing is they're cranking that volume up a little more. Now you got my attention. Right. As that person continues, oh, yeah, I know what that's like. They talk a little bit more, oh, man. And maybe somebody gets emotional because they remember where they were in that moment as somebody's telling the story, and they go, yeah, for me it was this. For me it was that. For me it was something else. So, man, I love that. I've got to be mindful. I've got to be respectful of your story. And I want to save room and space to do that. Because this is fascinating. We could talk about this all day long, but I would be doing the listeners a disservice if we didn't hit on some of the highlights of your story. We will do that. Shay Watson is my guest, co-host of the Pantry podcast. Come back because Shay's going to tell part of his story here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. You come back in just a moment. Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I want to take a moment and tell you about my friend Harry Spate and his new book, Selling with Dignity. Harry has taken an age-old concept of sales and he's put a new twist to it, and I love the direction that he's taken with Selling with Dignity. And here's what's encouraging about Harry's book. Instead of viewing people as numbers and machines, salespeople are now given the tools and the encouragement to be dignified in their approach. Here's what Harry says. He says, selling is an honorable profession when it's done right. When sellers feel they are valuable and have integrity and respect, this opens the door for better conversations and eventually relationship. This book puts an end to sleazy sales tactics and proves why selling with dignity can be done, and it leads to massive success. And I couldn't agree more. Go to sellingwithdignity.com, get your copy today, and if you want Harry to sign it, he'll do that for you. Again, go to sellingwithdignity.com and pick up your copy today of the new book by Harry Spate, Selling with Dignity. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Shay, listen, man, we've had some dynamite conversation, and I've loved every minute of it. But again, I'm going to feel like I missed it if we didn't dive into your story. And you mentioned it before the break, some of the things that you've gone through. I don't want you to take me through the lowest moment of your life. I want you to take me to the place where things started shifting in your life in those areas, because people would say, well, take me to the lowest moment. And yeah, that's where everybody wants to go with a story. I want you to take me to that place when things really started to shift, or take me as far back as you want to go. I mean, really, the floor is yours. I'm going to shut up. And I'm just going to back away here, and I'm just going to let you take the keys and you take us wherever you want to go. And I may jump in with a thought or two or a question, but man, I'm going to hand you the keys of the car. You take us where you want us to go.
I love testimonies. I think we've dialed that in through the conversation that we've been having, because what's cool about a testimony, and one of my mentors or discipler early on told me, he goes, hey, look, share 10 minutes of your beginning, but share 20 minutes of how good it is now. And I think that's a key for all of us, because we tend to spend a lot of time in where we were, and we don't spend enough time in where we're going. And it kind of makes me think of the demon-possessed man. When Jesus comes off the boat, man, he's out there, he's just reckless, just completely reckless. And Jesus says, everybody's avoiding him, they're scared of him, he breaks chains, he's wild. Mm-hmm. Jesus goes right to him. He's like, I'm okay with this. And then he heals him up and all this stuff. He wants to go with Jesus. And what does Jesus tell him? He says, no, he says, return to your home. Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. Yeah. And I love those where that leads. And so where was my turning point? I'm 13 years into a marriage. We've had 8 miscarriages. I quit drugs for my ex-wife. And life just got really hard because we had nowhere to turn to except to each other, and then each other was failing like left and right. And the idea of going back to a life like that started to come into the house or creep into the house. And I sat there, and something inside of me was just like, if you go back to that, if you go back to drugs, if you go back to drugs especially, you're finished.
Well, that's a place where people can bury hurt. And every time you have a miscarriage, it's a hurt that begins to layer, right? I mean, is that kind of where you were, kind of what you were feeling and how you were in that moment?
Yeah, I know men don't get as much of that attention as we give a lot to the women because we're the bravado, we're the macho, but it rips you apart. You're right. It's layered, layer. And we're not talking like the first week or the first couple of weeks. We're talking getting into the second trimester. So, we're talking like getting like buying baby shoes for a child, and sending them to the grandparents and then losing a child. Then it happens again. You buy another set of shoes, you put it in the closet because you're like, you start to get that fear and that worry and you put them in the closet and then they just sit there. And they sit there for years. And one day you come to this conclusion like, well, we'll just never have a child. And you throw those shoes away or you give those shoes away. But there was no finality to that. There was no healing to that. It was just brokenness. And you're trying to receive something that you think is going to happen. So that's where we were at. And then drugs started kind of portraying, I don't want to beat up too much. So, but I had to put my foot down and say, hey, no, I can't have this in the house. At that moment, I think the Holy Spirit had been working on me since childhood. I believe in Jesus. I believed in Jesus, God, Holy Spirit. I just thought that I was no good. I was going to hell. So, it was my own thing that had to be worked out. But in that turning moment, my ex-wife left. And I remember that night. So the turning moment was 2013, New Year's Eve. I'm home alone. My wife has packed her bag. She's left. She's like, I just want to go hang out with my young friends and just go stay with them. And I'm like, alone. Here I am alone again. Of course, that feeling of aloneness was something I'd carried with me since childhood. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, I just want to go to sleep. So I pop 2 Ambien. I drink down a beer. I mean, I just want to go to sleep. I'm not trying to get messed up. I'm done. I'm tired. I wake up at a friend's house that's in Virginia, which is about 45 minutes away. And I'm like, how'd I get here? And he goes, well, you drove. And I'm like, oh, because I didn't remember any of that. And I'm sitting across from him. He's a military friend of mine, double amputee, really good friend from the military. And he's got a gun sitting next to him. And I'm looking at this gun and I'm like, why you got your gun? And he goes, well, sir, hey, brother, I just want to watch over you. But at the same time, I needed to protect myself. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, reach in your hoodie. And I reached into my hoodie and I had a pistol on me. But my friend sat there all night vigil, watching over me. And I told myself, like, here I'm telling my wife at the time, I don't want this stuff being brought in. I don't want a dependency. I don't want to turn to something. And yet, what did I do on New Year's Eve? I take 2 Ambien. I just want to be done. And so I wake up that next morning. It's New Year's Day. And I'm like, I go home. I'm feeling like I did it again. And so I open up a laptop. And my mom, they're praying for me. My dad's praying for me. Everybody's praying for me, that I would find a relationship, that I'd really find this relationship. I open a laptop and I'm like, I've done it every other way. I hit rock bottom. My wife left me. I'm sitting there like just lost. And something says, open this laptop, find a church that's close enough to you that if your car breaks down, you can walk or take the bus, but you can get there. And I found the church that I'm in now. So to me, I've always described it as hitting rock bottom, but landing on the rock of salvation. So landing with Jesus Christ, like landing into a relationship with something that never changes. And that was the turning point. It was in January 2014. Of course, everybody, hey, look, you make these decisions. And by February, I'm in Kenya, I'm in Africa, I traveled a lot. And I'm over there with the same friends because, you haven't changed your friends up. Your friends that party, your friends that have fun, methamphetamines, we're in the scene now. Here I was in Kenya hitting the meth. I'm overseas getting high off drugs. And I'm telling you, it was a wrecking ball to me. As I'm flying back from Kenya, I'm just like, I think I'm at my most broke. So broken was January. Most broke was the end of February. And
I got to ask you, Shay, can I jump in? I got to ask you this. It's amazing that you take 2 Ambients, you drink a beer, and you don't remember how you got there, but you drive 45 minutes to a friend's house, and you've got a pistol in your hoodie, and you don't remember any of this, and your friend's describing this to you. As you look back now, what emotion takes over first? Is it bewilderment that how did I pull that off? Or is it fear of something really bad could have happened? Or is it just overwhelmingness that when I had that kind of moment, a guy that had his own problems was watching over me and being that kind? Because I can't imagine. I mean, there would be a myriad of emotions that would come. As you tell that story, what's the first emotion that hits you as you relive that moment?
Shame. You're waking up in front of somebody that you have mutual respect for. Granted, your brothers, but they're seeing you at your weakest when usually they see you in your strengths. And I think it also, I not at the time, I would never think of it at the time, but I was also, in some ways, I felt, oh boy, it's like when your friend watches over you and you're just sitting there in awe almost, that he would care enough not to just throw you out, push you out the door. There's several Christ moments or reflective moments in my life where I was received when, man, most of the world would have rejected. And here he was in this moment and he was receiving me. Now the shame comes in and thankfulness comes in and gratitude comes in for what he's done for me. Embarrassment comes in. Amazed that you're right, I didn't kill somebody or end up in a concrete barrier or a wall. But also in that moment, and really because it's a changing moment, it was like, I can't do this moment. I don't have it in me to fix this. I have no strength in this.
So how does a military man, a career military man, come to terms with that? Because in the military, you're trained to know what to do, even in the most hostile, aggressive, life-altering situations. Like there have been guys on this podcast that were military people, and they've taken me through those moments in battle. One comes to mind, Pasha Palanker, steps on an IED, and he's like, I land 15 feet away. I've got all my arms and limbs, but I didn't realize I had a TBI. Another friend of mine, Eric Konovalov, walking me through that. Even a man who is the oldest living Congressional Medal of Honor recipient. And he's taken me through the moment at Iwo Jima where he's got I'm sitting in the room with him. He's got flamethrower. All of you guys have something in common, is that you're trained for moments of every piece of chaos that can surround you surrounds you. And in this moment that you're describing to me, you're like, I can't do this anymore. How does that come into play when your training for all those years in the military says, man, soldier, get your stuff together. Get yourself together and just plow. I mean, it seems to me, forgive me for kind of this bewildered question, but it seems so counterintuitive to all the years you spent in the military where you were always kind of drilled into your mind, in chaos, man, you rise up because that's what we do. We're the best and the bravest. And in this midst of chaos that you were having in your life, it really led you to a point of, man, I don't know what else to do. Does that seem to you, as you look back on it, the conflict of the life that you had lived professionally and the life you were living personally? I hope I asked that question right, because that's what's bubbling in my mind as you're telling this.
The bright side, I would call it, of success versus the dark side of my personal collided. And I had to come to that truth pill, and it hits you. And then of course, you know, as I started to say, I fell again in February because obviously truth pill hit me. I hit that bottom. And yet I think I still do some to this day. I hold those moments where I'm in control. Like I think I'm giving God control. Like, here it is. I'm humble. I got to drop my pride. I've got to get better. I've got to put all that training aside, and there's just some things I'm going to fail at.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you start finding yourself taking control again. And it took another breaking to where I finally, in that moment in time, it was like I said, there was a breaking and then there was a super breaking. And in that double down breaking after February, I literally came to the conclusion that I can't do this. I mean, I just could not do this. I had to give everything complete control, which, oh my God, complete control, giving complete control to anyone outside of myself. Back to the sifting on the bed. Obviously, I'm still learning because God's like, you keep telling me you're giving me this control, but I keep finding you in my business. And I'm like, okay, sift again. It takes a lot because we're actually taught that way. Like you said, we're taught to, raise our chest up, handle anything, be able to do anything. Even going through the psychiatric part of my life, the PTSD, the delusions, the nightmares, that was a difficult thing to do. And I hit it well. I hit it really well until it got to a point where I was putting my own soldiers at harm in combat because I was reckless in the sense of no fear, no anything. So you just all of these constant breakings. And when you look back at it, God was actually bringing me to a point because he knows us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And he brought me, I call it, I'm stubborn. Sometimes he takes a baseball bat and has to smack me in the head. I'm kind of that type.
Yeah.
And he took some really good swings.
Yeah.
Right. He took some really good swings at me and finally knocked some knowledge into me that, hey. And so in March, I got down on my knees of 2014 and I just looked up and I said, look, I'm yours. Whatever that looks like, I know there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, there's going to be challenges, things. And in that moment, he took some things away from my life that were demons. PTSD gone. I haven't had a delusion, nightmare, flashback since. Praise God.
Amen.
Pornography gone. Like in a heartbeat, just no desire. Drinking, alcohol, drugs gone. Now, pride and some of these other things that we have to work to this day, I have to sit there and I go to work sometimes. I still work for the Army, so I'm still around bravado, and I have to remind myself even to this day, fruit of the Spirit, Shay, fruit of the Spirit, Shay. And one of my ones that I key in all the time is self-control, because I am so used to just and it's like back it down. Get that control.
Yeah.
Let God work. Step back. Don't engage, because engagement. Hello, we're warriors.
Oh yeah.
My whole beginning career, I went from infantry on up and moved up to ops, and so I'm always used to engaging. Like the enemy comes at me, I engage. Enemy comes at me, I engage. And I don't have a lot of fear when it comes in that. So when things are thrown at me, I don't have that type of fear that some people might have or might not have. And it's like, I want to engage. And God is telling me, no, disengage. I have this, I've got this. And so that was really important, like life-changing actually, because it took some pressure off.
Yeah.
It really did. It's like, oh, okay, it's here. Okay, awkward. Sometimes I
don't have to control the fight. That's
right.
I don't. That's exactly. I got to ask you this: if you could jump back, as we record this in January of 2022, you could go back to January 2013, and you would find Shay Watson. What do you think you would give? What kind of encouragement? What kind of intentional encouragement would you give Shea of 2013 from Shea of 2022, if you could step back, how would you encourage yourself? How would you counsel yourself in those dark moments?
Very interesting question that I would probably usually have an answer for. But as I'm sitting here talking to you and like kind of rolling these thoughts in my head and thinking about engage, disengage, engage, disengage, engage, disengage. We always think that we can go back and engage in something that God has already put in motion. And so I'm going to sit here and say that I really believe that I would disengage, because I believe that everything that happened, I don't call my testimony, I call it God's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
There was a necessity for this. I had to be, there was another time I'm sitting in my apartment, I'm coming home, I'm listening to Jeremy Riddle, Sweetly Broken. I also sing, so I love music. I'm on the worship team, and it's just so awesome. I love to worship. Obviously, worship is my worship. That's what the shirt says. But and I'm listening to Sweetly Broken. I come into my apartment. This is after like complete submission to God and saying, God, I just can't do this. And it's talking about being sweetly broken, and those two things never went together for me. Mm-hmm. If you're broken, you suck. To put sweetly broken in front of that, hold up now. This is something really good. So you and I
are two totally different people. Because at our church, I play keyboard. And there are times that as they're singing, and I'm bearing down, I'm looking at the keyboard, make sure I'm hitting the notes right. But there are times that I'll look in the balcony. I'm like, okay, who's in the balcony? My like kind of like ADD kind of kicks in. Like, okay, who's in the balcony, or where's my wife sitting, or where's it kind of breaks that. It's not that I'm not engaged in the worship. I'm just I'm focusing on the chords I got to play, and where we're going next, and I'm listening to my drummer, I'm listening to my bass player, and I'm just like, there are times that I just got to disengage. We talk about engagement. There are times I just got to disengage. Like, yeah, I need to just kind of look around a little bit. Like, oh, cool, so and so's there, and then kind of middle note, like, I had to make sure I see him after church or see them after. I don't know why that triggered what. What's that?
That's amazing capacity. So
I don't know what made me bring that up. I guess you were talking about being
so different. Yeah. To be honest, we're not so different. Here's the reason. So I run around church because I help pastor. I pretty much I fill in where it's necessary. And so I am always like boom, 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 boom. Like I have that same problem, organization, and like it's gotta be and I'm constantly thinking about different things. Worship is the one place that something shuts down, and I don't even know that they're there. Like I feel so alone on the stage, but it's a cool moment in time and space where I get to just shut down for a minute because my mind is constantly going as well. So we're not really that different. It's just that I found that one place where my mind ain't just going 100 miles an hour. Like, okay, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? Oh my gosh. Or I gotta talk to him, or I gotta see him. And it's just like, so blessings, it's like, it's a blessing.
Yeah. There were a couple of Sundays that I was helping my pastor, like you, helping do some different things. I wasn't playing, they were like, hey, we need you to do, my pastor was like, I need you to do a couple of different things. And my watch that I wear to church is a hybrid smartwatch. And so I'm syncing it up the next morning, and it's like I look and it was like 15,412 steps, and I'm like, oh my word. Like I literally walked like 3 miles just doing stuff at the church, and I can totally empathize there. I got to ask you this, Shay, as we bring this conversation to a close, because I want to be respectful of your time and the audience's time. And I've so loved this conversation, man. This has been so good. I want you to share with folks out there your biggest piece of intentional encouragement.
Sometimes we have to sit back in the brokenness, and we have to recognize that we don't have it all together. I know that's like against the norm. It's like we're born to sit there and make people believe that we have it together. That's that story, even going into Sweetly Broken and laying in the entryway of my apartment crying, which isn't my thing. I mean, crying isn't always the jump through for me, but just sitting there and really recognizing that it's okay to be in that position in that moment. There's a reason, there's a purpose. And then coming around the corner to a kitchen that honestly, all the dishes had fallen out of the cabinets. I don't even to this day know how that happened. But looking at a ground and seeing all these broken pieces and being overwhelmed, saying, oh my God, and like, you look at your kitchen wrecked, you're like, and you sit down, you're just looking at this and all of a sudden you hear this small voice saying, now get a broom, get a dustpan, clean it up. You clean it up and you look at the floor and it's like nothing ever happened. Mm-hmm. God in that moment was sitting there telling me, and not that I hear this like angel of the Lord, no, I'm just saying you get this feeling and he's like, this is what I've done to you. Now let's learn how to be there. So intentionally learning who God tells you are. We have a lot of opinions for ourselves. We like to weigh ourselves down with a lot of negative opinions. We try to say, oh, we're good. But most of the time, if you think about it, a lot of people, at least, we beat ourselves up pretty rough. But God's sitting up there and he's looking at us. He says, but you got my son and you're my child. And I don't see you the way that you see yourself. Is there things that we can work on? Absolutely. But my opinion matters, not your own. And I'm gonna work with you in this. So intentionally hearing God and receiving and accepting that. I psychology, I'm not the best, but I've been through a bunch of it. And they always talked about, reinforcement, right? And what I see the Bible as, I could sit there in the verses that say I'm a loser, or, that say I got sexual immorality and all of these sins, or I can sit in the verses that sit there and say, the fruit of the Spirit, when you tie into this, the fruit of the Spirit, now you have love, there's joy there, there's peace there, there's patience, there's kindness, there's goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things, there's no law. You see, we put ourselves in that law. Mm-hmm. We put ourselves on the throne as Christians sometimes, and we take on that authority that we're like God. And it's like, and I've learned really fast that I don't want to sit on that throne.
No.
I prefer him to be right where he's at, telling me exactly who I am. And so I am intentionally hearing his voice telling me who I am.
Yeah. That is so good, man. What powerful intentional encouragement, because again, no matter where you walk, no matter what you do in life, you're not defined by other people's definition of you.
Right.
You and God get to have that choice. And so, man, I love that. Tell folks how they can find you, find your podcast, connect with you guys, get your resources. I know they're going to want to connect with you.
Awesome. I always say that. I don't know why, old school maybe. www.thepantrypodcast.com. We're on all the platforms, Spotify, Apple. We are on YouTube now. Look up the Pantry Podcast or the Pantry Podcast on YouTube. And basically our website will get you everywhere. You get out to the pantrypodcast.com and it will take you to our support page. When I say support, who we're supporting, our Kenya support, feeding the hungry in Kenya right now. And just loving to get out there and just have these episodes that encourage people. And that's the easiest way, though, I think, is just the website.
Man, that is so good. Go to the Pantry Podcast, ThePantryPodcast, thepantrypodcast.com. Shay Watson, man, this has been so good. Thank you for joining me today on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Oh, man, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Brian.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.